15 black actresses who their partners said had a disgusting body odor. Have you ever wondered what truly hides behind the dazzling stage lights and the picture-perfect smiles of Black Hollywood's greatest muses? We idolized these powerhouses, mesmerized by their golden illusion of flawless beauty and Emmy-winning brilliance. Yet, peeling back the velvet curtain reveals an earth-shattering secret that turned their glamorous existence into tabloid fodder. Trapped behind invisible walls of immense pressure and racial prejudices, many succumb to a silent predator. Prolonged benders and extreme neglect morph their divine physical forms into vessels of raw agony. Brace yourself as we uncover the scandalous betrayal of their own bodies, where the stench of deep decay and toxic romance forced lovers to flee, exposing the merciless system that slowly consumed them alive. Vanity. It started with a microscopic trace of white powder dusted against the delicate black lace of a high-end designer gown, left crumpled on the floor of an exclusive Los Angeles hotel suite. To the untrained eye, it was merely the glamorous aftermath of an elite party. But if you looked closer, that single speck of crack cocaine was the genesis of an earth-shattering secret. Vanity, born Denise Matthews, was the ultimate powerhouse of the 80s, the intoxicating protege of Prince who effortlessly dominated the dazzling stage lights in films like The Last Dragon. Yet, beneath this picture-perfect illusion, a silent predator was already nesting deep within her veins. A famous rock musician, lured by her fiery reputation, once bolted from her bed in the dead of night. It wasn't a sudden loss of passion, but a visceral reaction to a suffocating, necrotic stench radiating from her pores, the grim byproduct of days spent locked in a toxic romance with narcotics, completely forsaking basic human hygiene. Her extreme promiscuity with rock legends like Nikki Sixx became relentless tabloid fodder, deliberately masking the raw agony of a body quietly wasting away. This invisible punishment of fame transformed a mesmerizing icon into a fragile shell, her internal organs decimated by a merciless foe. Chained to a brutal dialysis machine until her final gasp for air in 2016, she traded her golden years for a slow death sentence. The cold truth remains: the brightest Hollywood stars often leave the foulest scent when they finally burn out. Rarely does a crumbling empire collapse in silence. Instead, it leaves behind a trail of shattered velvet and suffocating decay, a chilling reality that soon crept into the lavish Beverly Hills apartment of another trailblazing queen whose historic trophies could never fully mask the creeping rot of her own making. Gail Fisher. In the year 2000, inside a desolate, rundown room completely devoid of the forgiving spotlight, a lifeless shell finally succumbed to a merciless kidney failure, entirely consumed by absolute poverty. This death sentence was not a sudden accident, but the agonizing finale of Gail Fisher, a woman who had once been the ultimate powerhouse of television. Decades earlier, she was a pioneering icon, the first black actress to capture a prestigious Emmy for her role in Mannix. Yet, trailing behind that historic triumph was a devastating double life. Rewind to the late 1970s. Inside a lavish Beverly Hills apartment, her illusion shattered completely when a devoted young lover hastily packed his bags, fleeing in absolute disgust. He was driven away by a suffocating, pungent stench radiating from her skin, a foul byproduct of abandoning basic hygiene to drown in endless cocaine highs. To cope with fame's crushing pressure and an unfillable void, she treated hard liquor and heavy drugs as her closest allies, burning through a massive fortune with reckless, out-of-control spending. Her chaotic string of fleeting marriages became prime tabloid fodder, masking a deeply rooted pain. From reigning supreme over Hollywood to wasting away in public disgrace, her descent was terrifyingly rapid. In the end, the brightest halos always cast the darkest, most consuming shadows. From the silent poverty of an abandoned television star, the frequency of ruin seamlessly tunes itself to the booming echoes of a sold-out jazz concert, where a heavenly melody fought a losing battle against the deafening screams of a tortured mind. Phyllis Hyman. Long before she swallowed a lethal handful of sleeping pills in 1995, a silent predator had already hollowed out the majestic mind of Phyllis Hyman. The legendary jazz vocalist, possessing an imposing height and breathtaking beauty, fought an invisible enemy, severe bipolar disorder, that twisted her daily reality into overwhelming paranoia. To the audience, her powerful stage presence was a brilliant golden illusion, but the raw agony of her ruined mental state manifested in devastating manic episodes behind the heavy doors of her New York penthouse. Attempting to drown this merciless foe, she relied on a chaotic cocktail of hard liquor and heavy narcotics to maintain a fake euphoria. This psychological decay quickly bled into a grueling physical reality. After a sold-out show, a young lover expecting a glamorous embrace instead recoiled in pure disgust. He spat venomous insults at her overpowering stench, a vile mix of stale booze, manic sweat, and the pungent neglect born of deep, unmedicated depression. This cruel rejection from a toxic romance deepened her unfillable void, pushing her fragile sanity past the absolute brink. Ultimately, her soul had already died in the suffocating darkness of her own mind long before her physical body surrendered. When the haunting jazz melodies fade out to leave only the acrid scent of mental collapse, the sickening aroma of abandonment seamlessly drifts into the smoke-filled mansions of the film industry, infecting a feral screen queen who boldly treated her own existence as a reckless gamble. Carol Speed. If you had stood in the corner of that smoke-filled Hollywood Hills mansion, the suffocating atmosphere would have choked you. I remember watching her, the radiant icon of the blaxploitation era, lounging on a velvet sofa surrounded by elite filmmakers. She was a powerhouse carrying films like The Mac. Yet, from my vantage point, the golden illusion completely shattered. A famous movie star beside her suddenly recoiled, his face contorting in sheer disgust as he violently pushed her away. You could feel the chilling speculation ripple through the room as he insulted her pungent stench. It was an earth-shattering secret laid bare, a horrific blend of days-old liquor, stale sweat from endless sexual escapades, and the raw agony of a body running on pure exhaustion. Instead of shrinking in public disgrace, Carol laughed, leaning deeper into a toxic romance with narcotics. In her explosive novel, Inside Black Hollywood, she willingly exposed this double life, embracing her feral rebellion against fame's crushing pressure. But as the wild nights inevitably faded, she was left with nothing but the cold, lingering smoke of a spotlight abruptly turned off. The roaring crowds of a rebellious decade eventually thin out into the deafening silence of an empty hotel suite. There, a much earlier pioneer discovered that breaking racial barriers only guaranteed a more secluded chamber for her self-destruction. Dorothy Dandridge. The year was 1955, and the world held its breath as she completely shattered history, becoming the very first black woman nominated for a Best Actress Academy Award for her electrifying role in Carmen Jones. It was the absolute pinnacle of human achievement, a dazzlingly picture-perfect golden illusion where she reigned supreme as an untouchable goddess. Yet, the stark contrast between that blinding Oscar spotlight and the horrifying reality of her 1965 demise constitutes a truly devastating sudden drop. Trapped behind invisible walls built by the systemic blade of a deeply prejudiced industry that refused to offer her worthy leading roles, her fragile soul desperately sought refuge in scandalous betrayals and toxic romances with abusive men. To cope with this unfillable void and the looming shadow of absolute bankruptcy, she traded her regal poise for a fatal reliance on heavy sedatives and cheap alcohol. The raw agony of her rapid decline manifested in visceral ways. Behind the closed doors of a luxury hotel, a powerful lover violently shoved her away, his face contorted in disgust at her overpowering stench. A foul, heartbreaking concoction of stale booze sweating through her pores and the neglected hygiene of days lost in a severely depressed stupor. Is a historic, trailblazing legacy truly worth the price if it only purchases a first-class ticket to an agonizing, solitary death? A delicate rose ultimately wilts when deprived of sunlight and care. Conversely, a vastly different, more feral creature eagerly sets the entire garden ablaze, proudly wearing the suffocating ash as war paint for a never-ending night of manic rebellion. Grace Jones. 48 hours of continuous, frantic dancing under the blinding strobe lights. 0 hours of sleep. A daily intake consisting entirely of raw oysters and flowing champagne. These were the cold, terrifying metrics of a powerhouse who treated her own biology like an indestructible machine. Beneath the edgy, muscular exterior that effortlessly dominated the dazzling stage lights in A View to a Kill, Grace Jones was a ticking statistical time bomb. She unapologetically collected lovers, ranging from Jean-Paul Gaultier to Dolph Lundgren, like expensive pieces of jewelry, but this relentless accumulation of toxic romances merely served as a double life to mask a dangerously undisciplined reality. The physical toll of this boundaryless existence was meticulously measured in the dead of night at Studio 54. When a young companion pulled her into a dark corner, the statistics of her raw agony became undeniably tangible. He violently shoved her away, gagging at a suffocating stench. It was a horrifying, calculated sum of dried manic sweat, fermented liquor, and the unmistakable odor of a body slowly necrotizing from massive quantities of heavy narcotics. Yet, instead of succumbing to the invisible punishment of public disgrace, she simply threw her head back, laughed, downed another glass and dove headfirst back into the chaos. Ultimately, when you multiply a golden illusion of invincibility by decades of relentless self-destruction, the final equation always equals a tragically beautiful, yet entirely unavoidable ruin. As the frantic arithmetic of those disco nights mathematically zeroes out, the atmosphere violently shifts, replacing this explosive rebellion with a terrifyingly silent descent into a blindingly white, narcotic nightmare. Olore. A single, fleeting choice can summon a merciless foe that haunts an entire lifetime. For Ola Ray, the stunning powerhouse and radiant muse of the iconic Thriller video, that fateful ripple occurred on the edge of a hotel bed. Following a debauched party, she lay beside a famous actor in a narcotic haze. Instead of an embrace, the man violently shoved her away in absolute disgust. He hurled cruel insults at her overpowering stench, an earth-shattering secret concocted from fake gunpowder, stale sweat from unwashed days, and the harsh chemical scent of cocaine. This brutal humiliation was her ultimate crossroads, a wake-up call to abandon her double life. Yet, she made the one fatal decision that guaranteed her sudden drop. She smirked and buried her face right back into a pile of white powder. That single choice to prioritize a toxic romance with narcotics over her own dignity became her Hollywood death sentence. Instead of attending auditions, she chased an unfillable void, allowing a silent predator to ravage her picture-perfect beauty. The invisible punishment of the industry quickly followed, culminating in public disgrace with a devastating 1992 arrest. How terrifyingly fragile is human existence, when a solitary refusal to wake up transforms a global dream into an irreversible nightmare. The intoxicating vapor of illicit rebellion eventually dissipates, giving way to a much heavier, more tangible burden of sacrifice. Deep within the stifling wardrobe departments of major film sets, the air grows thick with trapped heat, where garments designed to project absolute royalty morph into beautiful, suffocating cages for the flesh. Do Die, 262-2. Madge Sinclair. I am the massive, gold-encrusted crown of Zamunda, and I was forged to be a beautiful executioner. Resting upon the regal head of Madge Sinclair under the sweltering heat of Californian studio lights, I felt her silent tremors. She was a phenomenal powerhouse, radiating a golden illusion of African royalty in coming to America. Yet, beneath my crushing weight and dozens of layers of thick fur and embroidered brocade, I drank the raw agony of her suffocating flesh. For 18 grueling hours a day, I sealed off her skin, trapping her body heat until she was drenched in stagnant sweat. I watched the illusion shattered when she finally peeled me off in her private quarters. A lover approached, only to freeze and back away in sheer disgust. He hurled cruel insults at the overpowering stench that I had forced upon her, a foul cocktail of trapped exhaustion and relentless sacrifice. It was her earth-shattering secret. The dazzling stage lights demanded the invisible punishment of severe physical torment. She silently bore this cross, trading her dignity and comfort for on-screen majesty. When she passed away in 1995, a merciful release from fame's crushing pressure, she left me behind. Now, I sit lifeless on a dusty archive shelf, a cold and glittering monument to the agonizing sweat of a queen who can no longer feel my weight. The thick, golden threads of an African monarch's suffocating cape slowly unravel through time, aggressively rest-stitching themselves into the heavy, beaded fringes of the Roaring Twenties, where an entirely different era constructed an equally torturous cage. Lynette Miko. The entertainment industry has always operated as a ruthless meat grinder, treating its radiant performers as disposable pawns on a chessboard of profit. The systemic blade of Hollywood was never sharper than when it slashed through Lynette Miko. She was molded into the ultimate picture-perfect icon, forced to project a golden illusion of elegance on the Cotton Club set. But beneath the dazzling stage lights, her reality was pure, raw agony. Directors imprisoned her in heavy flapper dresses weighed down by tens of thousands of beads, choking collars of thick feathers and massive fur coats. Enduring over a dozen grueling hours under high-wattage studio lamps, her skin faced an invisible punishment, suffocating inside linings that trapped her body heat without any escape. The sudden drop awaited her at home. Seeking a brief respite from fame's crushing pressure, she reached for her lover, only to suffer a scandalous betrayal. He violently recoiled in utter disgust, hurling cruel insults at her overpowering stench, an earth-shattering secret born of stagnant sweat, musty animal fur, and heavy theatrical makeup. This was the industry's ultimate humiliation, forcing a woman to trade her basic dignity and personal hygiene for a few frames of celluloid glory. Let her agonizing sacrifice stand as a chilling warning. The glittering crown of stardom is almost always forged in the degrading, suffocating sweat of those forced to wear it. As the blistering heat of the jazz-era studio finally cools into a bitter chill, a different set of blazing southern lights violently reignites to scorch the flesh of another legendary martyr. Margaret Avery. If modern social media had existed during the filming of The Color Purple, Margaret Avery's feed would have been the ultimate picture-perfect grid. You would have seen the dazzling stage lights, the glamorous golden illusion of an Oscar-nominated powerhouse, and immaculate velvet capes. But a single swipe left would expose a horrifying sudden drop into raw agony. Behind the forgiving spotlight, she was trapped in a literal pressure cooker. Tailors imprisoned her under dense layers of heavy sequin dresses and giant feathered hats that ruthlessly sealed off all airflow. Forced to endure blazing sets for over a dozen hours while starving and dehydrating, the invisible punishment of the industry left her completely drained. The true tabloid fodder wasn't a wild party, but the scandalous betrayal she faced in her own bedroom. When she finally shed the suffocating velvet and silk, expecting comfort, her lover backed away in sheer disgust. He hurled cruel insults at her overpowering body odor, a merciless foe concocted from days-old sweat trapped beneath cheap linings, stale fabric, and heavy makeup. She traded her physical dignity to deliver a fiercely proud Shug Avery on screen, only to be humiliated by the very luxury she was draped in. We think we know our idols from their highly curated, picture-perfect moments, but the public truly knows nothing about the suffocating stench of their silent, agonizing sacrifices. What happens when the velvet prison of high-budget prestige cinema is violently stripped away? It exposes a far more brutal, low-budget wasteland where the cinematic meat grinder simply devours its actors of color without a second thought. Vonetta McGee. Standing shoulder to shoulder with titans like Clint Eastwood in The Iger Sanction and reigning as the undisputed powerhouse of Blackula, she had secured an absolute pinnacle of cinematic glory. She was a radiant icon, a symbol of allure commanding the dazzling stage lights. Yet, this picture-perfect golden illusion aggressively contrasted with a horrifying sudden drop behind the scenes of Shaft in Africa. The very moment she grasped this historic reverence, she was plunged into the merciless meat grinder of a deeply prejudiced industry. The systemic blade of 1970s Hollywood treated black actors not as stars, but as cheap, expendable tools. Forced to execute grueling action sequences for 72 consecutive hours without a single break for basic hygiene, her body was subjected to raw agony. When she finally collapsed at home, yearning for a comforting embrace, she faced a scandalous betrayal. Her lover violently stepped back in disgust, hurling degrading insults at her overpowering stench, a vile mix of stagnant sweat, machine grease, and set dirt. This toxic romance shattered her dignity, turning her selfless dedication into an invisible punishment right in her own bedroom. She passed away in 2010, leaving behind a resilient legacy forged in exploitation, forcing us to ask, what is the true value of immortal fame if the artist must surrender their fundamental human dignity just to touch it? Out of the suffocating grime of one exploitative production, another towering monument of female strength was simultaneously being ground into the dirt beneath the scorching Los Angeles sun, proving that even the fiercest cinematic warriors could not outrun the industry's humiliating rot. Tamara Dobson. 60 minutes. That is the exact amount of time it takes for sweat and adrenaline to permanently embed themselves into the dense fibers of unwashed synthetic fabric. Now multiply that horrifying metric by 18 agonizing hours of high-kicking combat under the scorching sun of a Los Angeles junkyard. The raw arithmetic of Tamara Dobson's existence on the set of Cleopatra Jones yields a devastating statistical descent. She wasn't just acting, she was executing a grueling equation of physical survival. As a towering 6 feet 2 inches powerhouse and the ultimate feminist icon of the 1970s, she projected a flawless golden illusion. But behind the dazzling stage lights, the systemic blade of an exploitative industry forced her to execute an endless loop of stunt work without clean water or basic hygiene facilities. When this bone-crushing mathematics was finally tallied late at night, the sudden drop was inevitable. The moment she approached her lover for a sliver of comfort, he recoiled, his face twisted in sheer disgust. He spat out cruel calculations regarding her overpowering stench, a foul sum of days-old sweat, gunpowder, and the suffocating mustiness of her action suit. This invisible punishment, inflicted by the relentless demands of fame's crushing pressure, turned her glorious sacrifice into a deeply bitter humiliation. If an immortal legacy requires trading every ounce of a woman's physical dignity for celluloid glory, the devastating final cost always outweighs the fleeting reward. From the brutal mathematics of physical exhaustion, a far deeper, more insidious spiritual fatigue begins to calcify. An equally groundbreaking star soon discovered that when the crushing weight of Hollywood collides with the heavy demands of faith, the fragile human spirit is the first casualty. Teresa Graves. Long before the grueling 18-hour shoots of Get Christie Love broke her physical body, a silent predator of suffocating pressure had already begun devouring her spirit. As the first black woman to lead an hour-long American television drama, she projected a golden illusion of historic triumph. Yet internally she was torn by an unfillable void, trapped between Hollywood's relentless demands and her rigorous religious commitments. This severe mental exhaustion morphed into physical raw agony. After days without sleep, she returned home so shattered she couldn't even bathe. Seeking a comforting embrace, she faced a scandalous betrayal. Her lover violently recoiled, hurling cruel insults at her overpowering stench, a foul mix of dried sweat, studio dust, and heavy makeup. That degrading humiliation became her ultimate invisible punishment, proving that a star's soul often dies under fame's crushing pressure long before the body finally collapses. Leaving behind these heavy spiritual chains, the scene violently fractures into the poverty-stricken shadows of low-budget horror, where a returning queen saw her majestic pride ruthlessly ground into the dirt. Gloria Hendry. I can still feel the suffocating heat and taste the blinding street dust of that Black Caesar set. I stood just off camera watching Gloria Hendry, our radiant Bond girl, pushing through her 18th consecutive hour of filming. She projected a flawless golden illusion, but up close, I saw the raw agony in her exhausted eyes. The systemic blade of those churn-and-burn movies mercilessly squeezed her labor, racing frantically against the clock to save dollars on location rentals. But the true heartbreak happened away from the crew. When she dragged her completely depleted, dirt-caked body back to her apartment, she endured a devastating sudden drop. Yearning for a comforting embrace, she was met with a scandalous betrayal. Her lover aggressively recoiled, his face twisted in sheer disgust as he hurled vicious insults at her overpowering stench, a foul consequence of days spent laboring without a single moment for basic hygiene. It was a deeply humiliating price for cinematic immortality. Ultimately, the dazzling spotlight abruptly clicked off, leaving her standing entirely alone in the bitter dark.